Hello, in this week's lecture I'll be talking about creating user interfaces for your game. The user interface, or UI, is responsible for presenting relevant information to the player in order to help them make decisions, and sometimes providing other options for interaction that go beyond the basic controls of the game. User interfaces are everywhere in games. For example, the heads-up display, also known as the HUD, which overlays key information about the game on top of a scene. This could be the player's health, the current goal for the player, or the damage they've just done to an enemy. They can also display dialogue or let the player know that certain actions are now available to them. Another common kind of interface is the menu, where we're taken out of the main gameplay in order to do some activity like inventory management or crafting, or to configure the options for the game. Now, a good user interface can be absolutely critical to playability. Players won't like it if the information they're presented with isn't clear, and they'll be confused if there's too much information. Let's take a look at an example of a user interface in Unity from the Explorer project, which you can find under the Learn tab in the Unity Hub. This project has a number of user interface elements. When we start it up, we can see this dialogue overlay, which appears at various points during the game. It also has a pause menu, and there's always this HUD in the top left of the screen showing the player's health. Let's pause the game in the editor and take a look at the health bar. So the health bar corresponds to this game object, health canvas, in the object hierarchy. You can see that if I deactivate it, then the health bar disappears. So there's a lot going on in the inspector here, but the main thing to notice is this canvas component here. A canvas component you can think of as creating a two-dimensional space to which we can add UI elements. It's the main way that user interfaces are created within Unity. So we have this canvas component, and it's attached to a game object, which we call the canvas object. You can see that the game has a couple of other canvas objects. It's got objects here corresponding to the pause menu and objects that correspond to the dialogue overlays. If we expand the hierarchy on the canvas object here, then we can see that it has a number of child objects. These are basically the UI elements which are going to appear on this canvas. So they could be static elements like text or images, or interactive UI elements like buttons or sliders. And in this case, we've got 5 child objects, and these correspond to the 5 hearts that appear here. Right, so each one has one of these image components, the inspector here, and that's displaying an image which is this gold heart outline, which you can just see there around each of the hearts. And then as a child of that, we've got another image object with an image component here, which is displaying the red heart here, which is basically being painted on top of the other image. It's important to understand here that the child order in the hierarchy basically defines the draw order of these UI elements. So the further down you are in the hierarchy, you're going to be painted later on in the process. So this object here is painted on top of this one here. Switching to the scene view, let's consider where these UI objects are actually located in the scene. So you may have noticed something a little bit different about these UI objects. They don't have the usual transform component that we're used to. They look a little bit different. So they have what's called this rect transform component, which is a special kind of transform which tells Unity how the UI elements are going to be laid out on that canvas. We'll take a closer look at rect transforms in the next video, but right now you can notice that this canvas does have a position defined by X, Y, and Z, although it's grayed out. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, it has this position here, so we should be able to see it somewhere in this scene. So where is it? Well, notice that it's also got this width that's over 700 units wide. That's absolutely huge compared to all these other assets. So we're actually looking at the canvas now. We're just looking at a very small part of it. So to see the whole thing, we have to zoom out like this, right? So eventually we can see there. There we go. That is the UI canvas with the health bar painted on it. Absolutely massive. Why is it so big? Well, that's because by default Unity is going to scale this canvas so that 1 unit of distance in the scene equals 1 pixel in your user interface, 1 pixel on your canvas. In this case, we've got a canvas which is 735 pixels wide, so it appears 735 units wide in the scene as well. If we go to the options on the scene view here, we can toggle 2D view on, and that's quite handy for if we want to get a good side-on look at the canvas and actually position UI elements on it. Now, the user interface looked enormous in the scene, but it didn't look like that in the game. It just got put in front of us. That's because Unity renders canvas objects a little differently to everything else. It uses what's called the render mode to decide how it's going to show you the canvas. So there's a number of different render modes. The first one is this we're looking at now, called Screen Space Overlay. So here, the canvas is displayed in front of everything else to render directly onto the screen. The scene that we're looking at is behind it, and it's scaled to fit the screen that we're viewing. And there might be a number of cameras in your scene. They don't affect how the canvas is rendered in this mode. It just gets painted on top of everything else. So we can see those UI elements in grey sitting in front of the scene, which in this case is 3 coloured cubes. So the next canvas render mode is called Screen Space Camera. And you can think of this as being a little like Screen Space Overlay, but now we've selected one of the cameras we're using, and we've kind of pushed the UI canvas into that camera. So it's rendered a particular distance from that camera, which means that there may be objects in the scene which are closer to the camera than the canvas is. So there might be objects which appear in front of our user interface. So it's always scaled in this mode to fit the frustum. Now the frustum is the volume, which you can think of as kind of a rectangular cone, which comes out from the camera, which is the visible area of the scene for that camera. And whatever distance we put our UI canvas, it's going to be scaled to fill the entire frustum. It's going to look basically the same size as the screen. So the final canvas render mode is what's known as world space rendering. And this is where the UI canvas is actually rendered within the world itself. So it has, you can think of it as being like a flat rectangle, which has a particular position and rotation in the world, behaves just like other objects would in that respect. So that's really useful when you want to, say, for example, use UI elements to display, say, an in-game screen, something that's called a diegetic interface, or annotations on characters in the world and that kind of thing. So going back to our example project, we can see that the render mode on the canvas is Screen Space Overlay here. There's a few extra options you can see here. So sort order is interesting. It allows you to say that if you've got multiple overlays, then which ones should be in front, basically, with higher numbers being in front. We can change the render mode to Screen Space Camera, and the immediate effect is absolutely nothing. That's because we haven't specified a camera. If we don't specify a camera, then it just defaults back to Screen Space Overlay, which we already had. So let's pick a camera. Let's use the main camera here. And it's now using Screen Space Camera mode, and it's completely disappeared. That's because it's actually being rendered at a distance of 100 units in front of this camera. So it's actually now being completely obscured by all the other objects in the scene. So if we play the game, we can probably see where it is. If we move around a bit, there you go. You can see that the hearts are just visible behind those objects there. There they go. Yeah, they're behind everything. So that's screen-based camera. If we want to select world space, then what we get instead is that health bar actually rendered within the world. So it's actually now rendered as that huge object we saw in the scene view before. And it stays there. Doesn't matter where we move the camera, the health bar stays hanging up in the sky there in a particular position. Let's have a look at another example, the dialogue overlays that we saw earlier. So I've got this dialogue canvas here, and I've turned off all the children beneath it. So all those UI elements that are going to be rendered on that canvas can't be seen at the moment. So let's reintroduce them one by one, see what's gone into this UI. So we've got two children on the canvas, this UI blur, turn that on, we can see that there's this rectangle that is now got this blur effect applied. So that's just this material here which has got a blur shader causing it to look blurred. Let's turn that off. We've also got this other child here called BG, which is just another image. So that just creates this rectangle with a nice image, slightly transparent. And we've also got two children beneath that rectangle. We've got another image which shows the main character, and this bit of text we turn on is rendered here. This text UI element is done with something called Text Mesh Pro. Now, the standard UI system in Unity has text components that you can put on UI objects, and they're okay, but Text Mesh Pro is a much more fully featured system, which is recommended really by most developers. So I can go into this text box here and change text if I want to. Okay, so putting all this stuff together, turning that blur on again, we get the nice effect of that dialogue overlay. So that's the basics of user interfaces in Unity using the Canvas component. Thanks for listening.